who participate in the career fair will get a copy of that as well. So it's easy for them to follow up and know who attended the fair, what your contact information is, and be able to look at your LinkedIn profile if they're interested in seeing more about your background. So at this point, Jim, I'm going to turn it over to you to kind of kick us off with talking a little bit about some of the stuff we're going to dive into as far as getting prepared to apply to these great companies as we move forward. So over to you.
Thanks, John. So, oops, pardon me. There we are. So a couple of things. As a Linux Foundation meeting, we have an antitrust policy that we want everybody to be aware of. So sometimes in these meetings, we have people who represent organizations who may be, in a sense, in competition with each other. And it's our intention with the Linux Foundation that any event, including this one, would not violate any antitrust laws or policies. So if you're aware of any way in which your participation would violate those antitrust laws or regulations, then we encourage you not to participate in the meeting. But that said, there's more information on the antitrust policy out at the Linux Foundation address here. And then code of conduct is always very important to the Linux Foundation. We're an open, inclusive community. We want to provide a harassment-free experience for everyone, for all participants at all of our events, whether they're in person or virtual. So we do want to have an open exchange of ideas and expressions, but we require that the environment recognize the value of every individual and group, and that we want to be sure that we treat each other with respect and professionalism at all times. So it's fine to disagree with each other, but let's do it in a professional, respectful way. That's all we ask. More on the code of conduct at the Linux Foundation site as well. That said, tonight's agenda looks sort of like this. John actually just did preview the career concept. I'm going to hit some blockchain concepts faster than anybody ever should, just to move through those to get sort of a level set on some ideas around blockchain. Many of you have lots of experience, some of you have none. So the idea is just to level set some basic concepts. And then I'll have John talk to industry use cases, and then he can actually introduce the session panelists we have tonight, which is a good group. And then I'll take the questions for the panel discussion, and we'll have an open Q&A after the panel discussion as well. And let John talk a little bit more at the end, maybe about the next session and expectations around that. And then finally, I do have some resources to share. This presentation deck that I have, will wind up posting that. So John, I think the video recording is going to be up on YouTube, right? In the Hyperledger channel?
Yeah, absolutely. This will be on the YouTube channel, Hyperledger. And,
so we can add the session deck up there then as well.
Correct.
Okay, great. All right. So that's what the session looks like. Let me see if I can get my, why is it not working? There it is, career fair concept. It's like my keyboard's not working well. Apologize for that. But some basic concepts on blockchain. One of the major things blockchain is offering is, I'll call it, help with the major problem that basically trust fuels the world today, period. And so I use the slide, just says trust fuels the world. And the problem is we're low everywhere on trust. It doesn't matter what the domain is. You could be talking about relationships, countries, technology, social media, anything, US Congress. And trust is a challenge everywhere today. And one of the things that blockchain can help with is automated digital trust. It's not the only part of that equation, but it offers some unique capabilities, let's put it that way, which is one of the reasons that blockchain is of interest to many organizations, for sure. That said, the concept of what a blockchain is, just briefly, these 5 things sort of set it apart compared to I'll call it existing solutions that are out there. So there are plenty of existing ways to integrate organizations, data, and operations across networks. That's not new at all. In the blockchain space, we call it DLT as well, for distributed ledger technology. They're similar in concept, not so different, but they're basically about trusted shared data across a network. And there's 5 characteristics, I'll say, that are common to all blockchain networks, regardless of how different they are. And there are massive differences, just like there are in types of databases or programming languages as well. When you get to blockchain, there's some basic differences across all of them. But most of them have in common these characteristics, that you're dealing with a peer network. There's no central manager to the network. It's usually a peer network of organizations on what they call nodes. So an organization who has a node in the network will maybe have, a cluster of, I'll call it, computers that represent that node on the network in terms of connection to the network, sharing information and running applications, if you will, on the network. The other main concept is that you have an immutable, or at least tamper-resistant, shared ledger. And so what that means is, unlike a regular database, which I can go in and edit anything in the database if I have permission to, with a blockchain, you can't edit or change or delete data. You can only add new data, which is very different than a traditional database. The other thing is that, in a sense, this ledger is shared across the network. So each organization that hosts a node on the network will have its own copy of the blockchain. And that blockchain copy, if you will, is synchronized. Every time I add a transaction as part of a block, we write that block of transactions out to the network, and all of the nodes on the network will wind up adding that block to their copy of the shared ledger. And then we have something called smart contracts. So with smart contracts, we have basically what I call secured program that implements a contract between different parties. So an example would be, I worked on an auto marketplace using Hyperledger Fabric. And in that case, we had dealers that were buying and selling automobiles, new automobiles, used automobiles, and so on. And in that model, we implemented basically the sale and the transfer of ownership as smart contracts on in this case, the Fabric blockchain we worked on. And so they basically write transactions. You could have and the transactions are not so different in some cases than traditional transactions you do maybe on an ERP system. The only difference is that these transactions are in a sense across the network, in a sense in near real time, I'll say, which is nice. So if I was selling a car on my car network, the fact that John bought that car, everybody who's connected to the network through whatever node is going to realize as soon as John buys the car that car is no longer available. That transaction has gone through. It's been, in a sense, approved by the network. And once that transaction is now complete, that car is, in a sense, no longer available for sale to anybody else on the network. So it's very similar to traditional systems, except for the fact that we have this availability of, I'll call it current state for everybody that's connected to the network. And then consensus, what is that about? Well, in a traditional system, we have transactions that we just write. So if I was taking an order, my application might write to an Oracle database, that this order from John, I just took the order, and now I'm posting the order to the database. So other than having the authority to write that transaction to the Oracle database after I validate it, there's really nothing else needed. But in a blockchain network, we're saying, no, this is more of a decentralized model for governance over transactions. And in that concept, what we do is the nodes all execute their copy of a smart contract on their copy of the shared ledger. And so whatever organizations in the network are responsible by policy for approving or validating, if you will, or endorsing the fact that that transaction is valid, those organizations collectively will do that. And that's what we call consensus. So they'll come back and say either this transaction is approved based on policy or it's rejected based on policy by the whole network. So you're getting the network, in a sense, to make that decision, not one single node. That's a difference. And then the last thing is, because it is a different type of a shared network real time, that governance services are really, really important. So every blockchain implementation that's out there will define for their network what's appropriate on how to manage that. So a lot of the platforms, whether it be Bitcoin, Ethereum, whatever, the public ones, already have baked in governance models for that. When you take, I'll call it a permission blockchain like a Hyperledger Fabric, if you're setting up your own version of that, then you get to decide the governance services. And if not, if you're joining, say, a Fabric network that exists, there's, again, governance services out there. So the concept of what those governance services are and how you manage governance is actually pretty important in blockchain world as well. And we try to be more transparent about what the rules are for governance as well. So with that, I talked about the fact there's a smart contract, which effectively is, I'll call it a secure program that's running on each of the nodes in the network for whatever the application is. And the diagram at the bottom sort of shows this. I have a business application over here. We have the identity. It says an application developer identity, but in reality, the contract is going to be deployed onto a blockchain network. And here's the contract on the network. And once you execute the contract, which is here, it'll write transactions into a block that get added to the ledger here, showing you the blockchain down here. Once you've written a transaction and the block is completed, what you'll come back with, most blockchain networks will return back the status on the transaction update back to the, in a sense, application that sent it. The important thing is that with a blockchain, the transactions are always signed. So we know, in a sense, who is the, in a sense, party that initiated the transaction. Sometimes transactions even require multiple parties to sign the transaction. Because they're digitally signed, we can identify, in a sense, who initiated that transaction, which is important in most blockchain solutions. There's also the concept, which isn't really well defined normally, but we have logical networks. So as an example, most of us can get onto Facebook or Instagram or whatever you want to join on a social media network. There's lots of networks. Many of them are public, many are private, but whatever the network is, there's a logical network that both people here as individuals and organizations can access in a logical network. But when you actually look at any blockchain network, you say, yeah, but how's it actually implemented? Well, down here in gray, I'm showing this conceptual network that's in this dotted green circle here. My particular example only has 3 host organizations in gray. So this is an unusual network. There's only 3 companies hosting my blockchain. If you notice, 2 of those are on cloud 1. Maybe that's AWS, and maybe cloud 2 over here is the IBM cloud. So you can see that, in a sense, in a blockchain network, the physical network, I could have multiple organizations, even in different clouds, that are all connected into one physical network, potentially. On top of that, though, I have a logical network. And what that means is, logically, I can have lots of organizations, even individuals, that can participate in that blockchain network based on how it's set up. So something like Ethereum or Bitcoin are public networks that are available, in a sense, for anyone to access. There's other ones as well that are public. But then you have private networks as well. So in business, we have lots of private networks. In blockchain, it's not hard to replicate those as well. So that's the concept of a logical network on top, like any logical business network, but it's mapping down to it, in this case, a physical blockchain network. Trusted data is a big deal. And what's different is you all, well, not you, but I'll say I confess, Google knows probably more about me than most of the relationships I've had as friends. And believe me, I'm sure they do. So for everything, almost everything I've ever done, they probably track everything I've ever done through a browser. So the deal is, in the current world, of course, Google can make money off of the data they have about me, but I don't get any, I can't participate in that in any way. At least they give me some controls. I can go into Google, or not Google, well, Google, and I can go into some of the other networks, social media ones like Facebook, and they give me some level of, today, probably ability to control certain preferences about what data is shared or not. But a lot of that is out of my control if you read the terms of their terms of use, if you will. But what's different in the blockchain world, we're saying data has high value. In fact, trusted data that's been verified on a blockchain network with what we also say consent management is a very big market going forward. So this is an example from Andy Martin at IBM, who has done a lot of work in figuring out what I call the economics of blockchain. And one of the things that has value now, but will have even more in the future, is this notion that if we have data that's been verified and trusted, and the right parties have consented to a certain use of that data, that there's actually high value for that. So best example was I worked with Moby on mobility, and we were looking at car data And whether it be accident data or trip data, if you are trying to issue car insurance policies, they do it through standard underwriting today to figure out what standard classes of risk are. But if you can get live data from a vehicle in terms of who's driving, how safe is the driver, where are they going, what kind of accidents have they had, what kind of accidents are going on in the area, if you take all that live data and actually use that, you could actually come up with a far better model for assessing risk as an insurance company when John's driving around Denver than using what I call the current models for assigned risk, if you will. So that data has potentially high economic value. And that's just one example of, call it thousands of examples like that. So anyway, Andy Martin has this little view showing you a network where we have a blockchain network and we're getting information, in this case, about a buyer and a seller for a digital asset. We say, calls it a digital twin, but you can't sell physically a car in a network. You have to sell, I'll call it the digital twin, or the concept of what that car is, the identity of that car. Second, though, Andy goes on to define use cases for blockchain in a token economy, we call it, where you have tokens like not only cryptocurrencies, but other kinds of tokens that can represent any asset. Could be a piece of art, could be music, a ticket to a concert. Those can all be represented by tokens, electronic tokens or digital tokens on a network. And so you can trade these digital assets as tokens, or just maybe trade the rights to those on a network. And the smart contracts enable us to, in a sense, define the rules of how those assets are traded, processed, and so on between parties. And then finally, the blockchain becomes that shared ledger of trusted data and source of the truth, because we know you can't change the data on the blockchain once it's been written. Just to be clear, when you write data to a blockchain, yes, it can't be changed. It's permanent. On the other hand, is the data accurate? That doesn't automatically guarantee the data is accurate. So I could have made an error on source entry on data, and it goes out, the network agrees it's valid data, but they still write it out there. If I priced, whatever, an order for John wrong, as long as it follows the rules of the smart contract, that network would write that transaction out there. I would have to issue, I'll call it a corrected transaction or an adjustment or full credit to the order to John to get the right data out there. So it's no guarantee that the source data is perfect, but at least the data that goes out there we know is shared and it can't be changed. A couple other things, identity is evolving. And in the world, we started off here on the left with what I call siloed identities, which is usually the user ID and password for security. So I identify myself to a system. They say, Jim, we're going to enroll you, give you an account, like the electric company. I have a user ID and a password. I can log in there and manage my account at my electric company. What's different is we had this thing called federated identity based on OAuth architecture, which says we can share identities that might be accepted by different organizations. So I have a LinkedIn identity, I have a Facebook identity, I have a Google account. You could have an Apple ID, a Samsung ID. You can have lots of different identities from these, I'll call it identity providers, and different organizations will accept those. So at my electric company, I could have used my Facebook account or my Google account to log into my electric company, and they would have identified me that way, as opposed to me setting up a separate ID over here. Now that sounds nice and efficient. The only problem is I wind up using my Facebook ID or my Google account or Apple ID everywhere. And if that is hacked or stolen or whatever, now instead of just having one place where that identity has been compromised, I might have 30, 40, 50, or 100 different places that have access to that shared identity. So the federated identity model was convenient, but not particularly secure in many cases. It added more risk. We now have a new thing called self-sovereign identity as an architecture, and blockchain kind of fits that really, really well. There are some examples around the world of countries that have started implementing blockchain with self-sovereign identity for stronger security, cryptographic security, better digital identity, and so on a blockchain. Best example is some of the places in Canada, British Columbia, Ontario, some of the other provinces up there have done a lot with self-sovereign identity. In the US, The state of Rhode Island actually succeeded in completing a POC with self-sovereign identity, and they're moving into production. Their plan to start a production project on that in 2023 to roll it out. But this is a different form of identity. You actually hold the identity yourself in a digital wallet. The government doesn't hold the identity, you do. What they do is they issue credentials. So if I had my own self-sovereign ID, I get a credential from the federal government that says, here's your social security credential to prove that I have a social security number. Same thing with a bank. I get a credential there. I can get an employment credential. All of those credentials, in effect, are installed in your digital wallet, which you then can easily use. So that's a newer model. And so different blockchains will support different identity methods. This triangle of trust, I can't emphasize enough. Whoops, didn't want to go that far. Triangle of trust. I can't emphasize enough how one of the big things that blockchain brings to the table for existing solutions and new ones is the concept of automating digital trust. So in this little simple diagram here, we have an issuer. In this case, it might be Cornell University. Issued Jim a diploma. I'm the holder in green. I have a diploma from Cornell. If John was going to hire me for his company, he's going to say, Jim, do you have a college degree? I'm going to say, sure, John, I went to Cornell. He goes, all right, can you prove that? Well, it's awkward to have to FedEx him my Cornell physical diploma. It's a lot easier if I have a digital credential. And in the digital credential from Cornell, all I have to do is present that credential from my wallet, consent to show it to John, and he's the verifier on the lower right there. And John will look at that and say, okay, your college degree from Cornell has been verified digitally. So if John and his company trust that Cornell is a valid college or university, if they have that trust line there, then John will say, yes, this is a valid degree from Cornell. And so that's one fact about you that we have verified automatically digitally. So that's the advantage of this digital verification concept and trust. Last thing I want to show you is this. In this diagram, this is not a physical diagram of a network. It's more of a conceptual diagram to say, here's a typical stack that I had used to build a blockchain solution for a marketplace. And you can see there's all kinds of boxes on this thing that are of all different types of technologies. On the bottom, we have multiple cloud deployment platforms we can push to: IBM Cloud, AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, on-premises clouds, other clouds, and so on. On the bottom, lots of different places to deploy blockchain solutions. But I have in these boxes lots and lots of different types of software and so on, not even looking at the hardware side of the network. And what you see is the box in orange there was a Hyperledger Fabric blockchain, and that had a bunch of capabilities: smart ledger, smart contracts, distributed ledger, and a bunch of other features that are part of Fabric. But if you look, that orange box is the only box that's the blockchain. Everything else is other software and other network components. So if you think about implementing a blockchain solution, the blockchain part itself is really in that orange box, whether it's Hyperledger Fabric, Kuhrt, Ethereum, whatever it is, it's in the orange box, if you will. So if you think about getting a job in blockchain, if somebody's rolling out, some organization or a group of organizations is rolling out a new blockchain solution, it's not just the orange box where there's going to be work and job opportunities. So there's, I'll call it job opportunities technically across every one of those boxes. For all of the skill sets that you need there, on top of which there's also different roles in blockchain solutions, not only to deploy them, but to manage them, maintain them, and support them. So if you think about that life cycle of rolling out a blockchain solution and look at all of the stuff that goes in there, blockchain adds to, it doesn't sort of take away from what existing technologies are. So if you have a technology background, my argument is going to be, you probably already have skill sets that are useful. If you've been managing technology or supporting it or operating it, you also probably have skill sets that are useful to people in the blockchain space. Does it mean you're an expert in blockchain? Not at all. But at least you have a starting point that says, hey, wait a minute, you guys are looking at either rolling out a blockchain solution or supporting one, and I do bring something to the table, even though I don't know anything about Ethereum or Kuhrt or whatever the blockchain is specifically. So in that sense, you really want to build upon the knowledge you already have. as a starting point. And yes, it would be great if we all learned more about blockchain. And that's the idea of some of the resources we'll talk about later. So John, I'm going to turn it back to you to talk more about industry use cases.
Okay, great, Jim. That was a wonderful overview about how blockchain works and some of the use cases. And right now, Jim, I'm going to take over and share my screen and just show
Yeah,
some
let
of
me
the
stop
other.
my share. I apologize. There you go.
Okay, let's just try it here. And I'm going to share this screen here. Okay, everyone can see my screen share there.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So really what I want to talk about before we get into the nice panel discussion here is, Hyperledger is well adopted in enterprises. And whether that's large companies, medium companies, small companies, or government, Hyperledger is really a go-to solution as far as a permission blockchain. So what I want to do is kind of just do a little overview here, focused on both Hyperledger projects, and then also companies that are here to present and get on the panel discussion, what they're doing in the space. And I think it's really exciting work. And I think that everyone here who wants to get into blockchain and be immersed in the space, there's a wealth of opportunity. And I'll just kind of talk about some of these projects that I think would be relevant to you if you're interested in getting into the space or changing jobs within the space. So first thing I'm going to do is look at some of the case studies that we have for Hyperledger. So there's LACC chain, which is basically using Hyperledger Besu to create the largest permission public blockchain. And you can see that's for government as a industry focus. And it's all about financial inclusion and public good. And what I'll do is, as we move along here, I'll share some of these links that I'm going through for you to go ahead and reference later on, but I think that's a great project. Hitachi, a well-known brand, is streamlining their procurement, and they're using Hyperledger Fabric. So those who are immersed in the community know Hyperledger Fabric was really kind of the core kickoff of Hyperledger, and it's really going into another long-term version now, but this is used for their contracts and document management. Another great company that is a well-known brand is Bosch, and they have, working with Hyperledger Labs on the economy of things and looking into using this for IoT, which is another exciting industry vertical. So anyone who's interested in the Internet of Things and how blockchain applies to IoT, Bosch is definitely doing good work around that space. Public Mint, they're also using Hyperledger Besu and looking at payments and DeFi. And people on the Zoom call here probably have heard of DeFi, decentralized finance, and that's really another core component of blockchain. And they're using Hyperledger Besu as well. We got a few more here that I can look at. We got MineHub and Quipsy, and basically they're doing another project around supply chain, and they're looking at Hyperledger Fabric as their solution, and looking at both workflow layer 2 and private data collection. So we talked about kind of that private data collection when Jim was talking about his degree from Cornell, and how we can share that out yet maintain privacy. And then Splunk and S&P Global. Everybody's heard of the S&P 500, and they're trying to correlate data across a bunch of data sets, once again using Hyperledger Fabric. So you can see there's a good theme here along finance and technology. So anyone in the audience who has a strong background in finance or technology, blockchain is definitely a vertical that you can get into that really has a lot of growth associated with it. Tech Mahindra, they're doing another great Hyperledger Fabric implementation, and what they're focused on is one again for government and land registries. And blockchain is one of those solutions that's a perfect fit for land registries because everyone always wants to track the provenance of who owns a parcel and make sure that it's free and clear to transfer, There's no existing liens on the property, and blockchain is really a way to secure that. Ledger Leopard, Ballast, Digital Cert. You can see that these are a lot of ones focused yet again on supply chain and banking. And then here's another good one that's around public key infrastructure. And you can see that once again, they went and used Hyperledger Fabric for their project. So here's just a whole bunch of ones, and we can just kind of scroll down a little bit quicker now and show you some of these other ones. Supply chain again, FinTech. This is based on Hyperledger Sawtooth. We haven't talked about that yet, but that's another Hyperledger project. We got Hyperledger Fabric here for Dubai. And then Kiva has done a great project, and I'm more familiar with the Kiva project, offering Africa's first national digital decentralized ID system. And they've used Hyperledger Indy, which is an identity platform using Hyperledger, and they're doing a great work for that. So that's covering financial services and banking, as well as decentralized ID. Walmart, they've been an early adopter of Hyperledger as well. Everybody's familiar with Walmart, and they've done a lot with their supply chain and focused on Hyperledger Fabric. So, a few years ago, they were talking about tracking, produce on their Hyperledger Fabric instance, and that's really kind of grown up with Hyperledger, and Walmart is really a great project. Got some other ones here. We got insurance. That's something that we haven't really talked about yet, but it's a great way of using blockchain to talk more about, how do we pay out insurance? How do we ensure that whoever's coming to get a claim is actually insured? And it really can reduce a lot of the overhead. We have these claims adjusters that have to come out, but there's some innovations around, being able to say, okay, you're in a designated disaster area, therefore your claim is valid, and we're going to issue you your insurance claim via blockchain. Pharmaceutical chain. This is another one that's ripe for innovation and making sure that you have the right prescription. It comes through and we have all the provenance for it. So there's never any question that it went from the supplier all the way through to the pharmacist to give you the right prescription. And that's very important as we move forward. C Ledger, another great one around finance. Sormitsu, they've done something with the National Bank of Cambodia, and they're using Hyperledger Roja. So, there's a lot of projects that constitute Hyperledger. It's not just one blockchain. There's a lot of different projects under here. Joysto did around document management, which is another perfect use for blockchain and data privacy. Mindtree, back to finance. And then some of the other players that we have is ChainYard. They're focused on supply chain, and I know that they're also interested in recruiting as well. And so, we can definitely pass their information along to them. Honeywell, they've done a great job with both manufacturing and in the aerospace community. One thing I'll highlight with Honeywell is they deal with a lot of the secondary market airplane parts that go into Boeing aircraft. And the one thing that we have to do is to make sure that whenever they're providing a part to an airplane, that the full provenance for that part is known and that they know the service life on that part and what aircraft it came out of, when it was manufactured, all those details. And using, Hyperledger Project is the way to really have the best provenance for those type of high quality and very valuable aerospace parts. And then Change Healthcare, another great one, BTP. Here's one that Jim talked about, which is great. British Columbia has really been at the forefront of adopting Hyperledger Indy and really trying to promote open source and digital identity, and basically really trying to embrace being able to say, if you have one identity with British Columbia, use it to go into your tax account, you can use it for your driver's license, and you can really, begin to have control over what Jim talked about, which is self-sovereign identity. I think that's one of the great use cases for blockchain is, you control your identity once you've established it, and then who has access to it and what part do they have access to. So, you don't have to give them everything each time. You only have to give them what's relevant to that certain government agency that needs that data. Here's another look at Walmart. We already talked about their food supply chain. That's a great use case. Circular. We got mining. So, being able to track and make sure that there's no conflict minerals for supply chain, and really to know where you're pulling stuff out of the ground is done in the right manner and in the right location without conflict. Scan Trust is another one. National Association of Realtors. This is great. There you can see real estate is really one of the emerging tech sectors for taking advantage of blockchain. Deutsche Börse is another one using it for financial services. And then, Sony Global Education, same type of thing. Looking at what is your credentials, what are your degrees, and how do we share those securely but effectively with whoever is looking to hire you. And, that's something as we move forward here with the hiring process we're talking about in the blockchain space. Maybe these companies will get on board with that and, look to adopt some of these technologies for that. A couple other things I'm just going to pop up here. We have Tracy joining us from Accenture. And you can see I just pulled up one of their blockchain services pages here. But they've done a lot of work in the blockchain space and is really one of the leading consulting companies for blockchain. And, we can just go through, I'll share this link as well, but you can see they've done a lot with decentralized identity, blockchain for supply chain, blockchain for social impact, which is fantastic. And, you can see all the different partners that they have. So, they're partnered with all the big players in the space and definitely do a great job of consulting for them. And they've also done a lot with the digital twins as well. And I know Jim mentioned that earlier in the discussion, but I know Accenture's done a great project around digital twins. We can look at Sybal next. And, there's the world's first proof of governance solution. So I'll have Christine talk about that when she's on the panel discussion with Jim. But, they've really done a great job of making sure that, data governance is handled through blockchain and really secure. I don't know if Bill Izzo has joined us or is able to, but I'll just pop open DTC for a second. And Jim, if you want to weigh in on this, feel free to do so. But, they're doing some real innovative things around, post-trade processing. They've done things with both Hyperledger and Ethereum through the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. And I think they've also worked with R3, Kuhrt on projects as well. But they definitely, they're settling quadrillions of dollars worth of stock and bond transactions. And they're the go-to agency to do that. And they really want to make sure that going forward, they're, set up for the 21st century to really handle those transactions. Jim, you have anything specific you want to weigh in on that?
I will. So there's a bunch of, like a lot of large organizations now, ours is heavily focused on, we have all large companies, I'll say, organizations of any kind, have huge digital transformation initiatives going on to try to shift what they're doing from prior systems, I'll call it Web 1.0 or Web 2.0, onto newer technologies and so on, and newer ways of doing business, newer ways of integrating with everybody, and more accurate, more secure, all that stuff. That said, we work with, I'll call it a lot of service partners to get our solutions out, like most big companies do. So actually, Accenture is one of the major partners for us. So we just completed something called the Lithium Project, which was with Accenture actually doing the coding for us on a, what we called it was a digital dollar project. So if you think about central bank digital currencies, the Federal Reserve in the US is asking, well, what would that look like? And so the Digital Dollar project that Accenture helped found is trying to answer that question for different use cases. And so when they came to security settlement, they said, okay, let's talk to DTCC and see if you guys can do a project, which we did, called Project Lithium, to try to figure out how that works. But it's a common thing for a lot of these bigger organizations now to say, gee, blockchain figures into the technologies we need, and we need people that can help us deliver those projects. And then the reverse is you have the companies like Accenture and other service providers that say we have those kind of skill sets, and they're also trying to grow their practices as well. So that gives you a little flavor of how that worked.
Perfect. Thanks, Jim. The final one I want to go over here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jim, is going to be Kaleido. And Kaleido, we have Nico on from Kaleido, and they've really done a great job of being a blockchain as a service infrastructure provider. And I've had the pleasure of getting on with the Hyperledger Firefly calls and hearing the great presentations. You know, they continue to upgrade Hyperledger Firefly as well. But if you want to work with a company that, you know, understands how to deploy blockchains effectively, and you want to focus more on your solution than really trying to get down into the weeds of setting up your entire blockchain infrastructure, Kaleido is a great company to work with, and they can really set up your blockchain ecosystem really at a very effective cost structure and very quickly as well. So, Nico, you have anything you want to mention about that right now while we're on this, or you want to save that until we get to the panel discussion?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, John. We can keep moving on if you want to. Okay,
that sounds perfect. But you can see a lot of these great companies that they work with: Citibank, Kroger, Shell. These are all name brand companies. Humana, World Wildlife Foundation, T-Mobile, ING. So, you know, really a great company doing wonderful work in the blockchain space, and definitely a great supporter of Hyperledger as well. So, Jim, at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay.
And let you go and start up the panel discussion, and I'm going to stop sharing now if you want.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, John. So yeah, I appreciate that industry overview. That was pretty extensive. Let me get out of here. Let me go back. Where's my presentation? I'm sorry. Okay. Hold on. Somewhere I got the presentation. It's probably in full screen mode. Let me get back here. Apologize. I can't get out of full screen on this thing.
If you need me to pull up the questions.
No, I'm fine on all that. I actually want to go back to the presentation though. So give me 1 second and I'll dig my way in there under Hyperledger.
No problem.
Here it is, and here it is, and finally, here it is. So let me open this up. Whoops, wrong thing, I didn't want to do that. So like anybody, I have too many things open on my desktop. So by the way, I'm going to offer a free course on how to have 400 browser windows open at once at some point. I do think I'm an expert at that. So let me make sure I get this open with, don't want to do that. I want to do it with Google Docs. Google Docs is much, much better. So I don't want to open it with Google. Okay. I guess I'm stuck with that for the time being. So this is what we'll do. Good. That's why I don't want to do it with the Office. Let me go down here. Okay, so a couple of things. We have, first of all, the panelists. So John gave a quick overview of who the panelists are. Karen O'Tony can't be with us tonight from Hyperledger, but we do have the others here. First, I want to give each of the panelists a shot to tell us a little bit in their own words what they focus on for their company, in a sense. Where does their company focus? What do they do? So Christine, if you want to lead it off with Sybal and, you know, the fact that you're CEO, tell us a little bit about Sybal and what you're doing there.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim, and thanks, John, to everyone here. Pleasure to meet you and happy to be here. Sybal is a governance innovation company, and so we are focused on helping regulated industry or industries that are pending regulation prove governance wellness. So understanding the effectiveness of their policies and procedures and how they're working in compliance with regulation. So we are an enterprise software and focused on key markets like the financial sector, supply chain, web, anything that is in the regulated industry.
Great. Thank you, Christine. So Bill Izzo's not online, is he, John?
No, I haven't seen Bill online, so let's
Okay,
move on.
all right. So I'm DTCC, but I'm already the moderator, so I'll don't have to work as a panelist. I won't do double duty tonight. But DTCC is the Depository Trust and Clearing Corporation, and Bill is Director of Information Technology Security. I work in the DLT space for them, and they have, as I said, a lot going on in digital transformation, especially in the finance industry, doing all kinds of projects. So I'm guessing we have the nature, I don't know, 5, 10 projects currently in blockchain alone. So Tracy, I want to move on to you. So Tracy, you have quite an extensive background, not just at Accenture, but tell us a little bit about your background and specifically Accenture, which is probably the largest organization I know of on the planet. I don't even know, I think, and I'll make this up, what do you have, 600,000 employees or something, second to Walmart on planet Earth or something like that?
700,000.
Okay, so I'm behind as
hello.
usual.
Hello, all. Tracy Kuhrt. I do work for Accenture. I have been with Accenture since 2019, but I got my start in blockchain back in 2015 at PayPal. Was taking a look at the IBM Open Blockchain platform, which later became Hyperledger Fabric. So I guess I've been dealing with Hyperledger since 2015. I used to be a community architect for Hyperledger for a couple of years, and I am currently the technical steering committee chair of Hyperledger Foundation. At Accenture, I am part of our Metaverse Continuum business group. I am specifically focused on technology architecture, and specifically with a focus on blockchain, decentralized identity, universal wallets, things of those nature. So definitely have a wide kind of varied background in the different sorts of blockchain technologies that exist out there. Not only Hyperledger, but Accenture is very much technology agnostic and focuses on a number of different blockchain platforms that exist out there. So happy to be here and happy to discuss as we go through what Accenture is working on and how you might get involved with Accenture as a potential future hire.
Great, thank you, Tracy. That's awesome. Yeah, and like I say, Accenture is just enormous in terms of the things they're focused on blockchain. It's yeah, we could do, I don't know, 2 or 3 days on just briefly going through all of the work they do in that space. So Nico Guyer, you want to give us a background on Kaleido yourself and what's going on there?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. Appreciate it. Yeah, my name is Nico Guyer. I'm a full stack senior engineer at Kaleido. And Kaleido is a really cool startup headquartered in Raleigh, North Carolina. We also just recently opened an office in Winchester, UK as well. So we're growing quickly. We have quite a few different positions open. So if you're looking to start your career in blockchain, we'd love to talk to you. But yeah, just a little bit about Kaleido. John did a great job introducing it a minute ago, but Kaleido started out as just blockchain as a service was kind of our core product in the early days. And from there, we developed a really robust consortium as a service product as well. So, lots of different companies that want to come together, form a consortium, and use blockchain to integrate. We provide that as a service. We also will oftentimes work with the consortium to help either design or build certain applications for them. And then through the journey of building many of these consortium multi-party networks, we saw many different common patterns in a lot of the different networks and applications that we were building, we said, boy, wouldn't it be really nice if there was an open source platform that had all of these building blocks in it, that these patterns that we keep seeing in project after project, that was a common that we could.
Yeah, Nico, I think you're cutting out.
Your audio is a little bit off, Nico.
Yeah. Yeah, we're losing your audio at this point.
Apologies. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, I switched to a worse microphone, but it works. I think my battery, my other one died. Where did my mic die? Sorry.
You were talking about Kaleido and building. I think you had just started the discussion on Firefly as the idea that you were trying to say we have a lot of common components across all these solutions. Yeah. So basically, we observed we're seeing the same patterns in many different applications, and we said, hey, wouldn't it be great if there was a platform that had all these building blocks built into it that we could reuse? And wouldn't it be even better if that platform was open source? And so this is where Hyperledger Firefly came from. Kaleido contributed the original source code for Hyperledger Firefly to the foundation, and many of the maintainers are employees at Kaleido, including myself. And so that's what I do day to day. I both contribute code to the various Firefly repos, and I'm also the open source community lead for Firefly as well. So I go to events like this, talk to a lot of people on Discord, help them learn about Firefly and how they can use it and that sort of thing. So I'm really glad to be here today. Thanks. Yeah, thank you, Nico. And of course, I want to warn the audience, you may not hear a lot from him in the future because I want to tie him up with lots of questions just that I need answered about Firefly. So take advantage of the time you get from Nico, because he and Kaleido are both a very useful and skilled resource. And I do want to emphasize, it's not just Firefly is a Hyperledger project, but I'll call it the economics of Hyperledger and the concept of open source are unbeatable. So a lot of companies are not familiar with the value proposition that something like Hyperledger or the Linux Foundation bring to the table. So when I go to work with companies, most of the time they say, you know, it'd really be great if we could build things that are reusable. So they're always talking about, gee, this is great. Let's build something that's reusable. And it's whatever it is they invest in. So again, I walk into my latest company, DTCC, and they're always saying, yeah, we got this whole system. We want to improve reuse. And then I say, okay, well, if I start measuring reuse here, why don't you start out by telling me what's the open source stuff you reuse? And they go, what? And I said, well, that's where I'm starting from. What didn't you have to pay for that you are using for free? And the answer, they go, oh, okay, well, I guess there's a few things. And I said, well, maybe that's a problem. The benefit from an economic perspective is when you go to someplace like Hyperledger, Linux Foundation, Apache, there's plenty of other ones as well. There's lots of what I call great software that's built by these communities and supported by these communities that, in a sense, you can license those for free and use them. On top of that, because they're in what I call a sustainable economic model, be it Kaleido or some of the other ones, Accenture's contributed to many open source projects as an example that are part of Hyperledger for sure. And so you have big companies that are saying, as Nico said, I need a way to make it cheaper for me and easier and improve the quality, so I'll build something. And they build components. So as he said, they built Firefly, but underneath Firefly, there were a lot of other components that they used as well. And so the economics of the open source model is phenomenal. And if companies aren't leveraging that well, or your organization's not, you can always look like a genius by saying, how about if we get all these great components that are already, in a sense, industry proven, that are out there, battle tested kind of a thing. And why don't we just start using some of those and cut the cost and time and improve the quality of our development work? And so you tend to look like a genius. They're going, oh, gee, that guy's really smart. What a great idea. So I'll call it, with open source, you have what I call a shopping exercise. The other side of it is, I'm looking at Firefly right now for something and saying, well, okay, if we want to use Firefly, they have this model that has interfaces for all kinds of services. Well, if we want to use something that Firefly doesn't provide, on our end of the fence, we could create an adapter for that interface. We do that. And then the opportunity is that, well, if we built the adapter for something new, whatever the new thing is, then the smart thing would be to contribute that adapter back as a plugin to the Firefly community in Hyperledger, and let Nico's team decide if that's useful or not as a plugin. If it is, incorporate it. If it isn't, it's a one-off. But that's a way to contribute back for, in a sense, all the savings that we would get from using frameworks like Hyperledger projects and Firefly and so on. So there's a whole economic model there that I don't think is advertised well enough. So anyway, I just did the advertisement for that. All right, that said, the format, we're going to go through, I'll call it a short list of questions. I want to give the panelists, I'm going to probably pick on a first panelist to answer each one of them. But then from there, we'll go through and I'll ask everybody else to contribute and kick in on the same question as well. And then at the end of it, we're going to open it up for Q&A fairly quickly. And as John said, by the way, if you're online, if you're interested in having your name and being contacted by one of the companies, please make sure you get your email address and your LinkedIn profile, if you have that, into the chat, and John will take care of making sure that your information gets distributed to all the companies. So the first question I have, and I'll start, Tracy, with Accenture, because your company has quite a broad focus everywhere. What business cases and industry solutions has your company adopted or supported? Which obviously I know I already gave the answer to that. I think it's a 3-day answer, but I'll let you take a crack at it.
Yeah, I think John displayed our blockchain index page. I think it does a really good job of kind of talking about some of the different sorts of use cases and industry type solutions that we have within Accenture. So as you probably are all aware, Accenture is focused on our clients and developing the solutions that they're asking for and the business cases that they're asking for. I see that we focused pretty much on the identity space, financial services, and supply chain as the kind of industry use cases, as John was mentioning when he went through the list. So we have obviously a number of different sorts of solutions that exist out there. We did contribute as well. You mentioned a couple of open source projects, Hyperledger Bevel and Hyperledger Cactus, that we've contributed, focused on blockchain deployment and blockchain interoperability, respectively. But really, it is what are the clients looking for and what are they looking to do, and we find that it really falls into those 3 categories of identity, financial services, and supply chain.
Cool. All right, thanks. So Christine, let me pop over to you and have you tell us a little bit about the use cases that Sybil's been looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. So we specifically at Sybal focus on the recordation or the ledger itself of blockchain technology and the immutability of it. And so we're looking at recording governance components to the blockchain to capture in a moment in time how well these policies are performing. And so again, we're still very, very focused on governance and making it less complex, more that if you are writing policy and procedures with specific intent to be in compliance with regulation, that you can see over time how well those policies are performing.
Cool. And then Nico, I'm going to kick it over to you. I know you guys, you mentioned before the Firefly thing that I'm focused on heavily. Before that, you guys had been working as consultants in a lot of different use cases. You want to give us some background there? Sure.
Yeah. So a lot of different applications in production today in a bunch of different industries. Quite a few different consortium networks in industries such as healthcare, finance, supply chain, insurance, and there's probably a few that I'm forgetting as well. So definitely like our bread and butter is sort of these consortium networks, and lots of those are, there's new ones being built on Firefly now, and we've upgraded some of the old ones to Firefly now that, some of them predate Firefly as well. So yeah, lots of stuff like that.
Well, and of course he did forget one, so I'm going to pick on that. And it's Swift CBDC POC. So Swift, that does the cross-border payments around the world internationally, they do most of them, has actually used Kaleido and Firefly to build out one of those consortium networks for testing CBDC. And so I'm actually part of the group that's doing that kind of testing right now. So that obviously went well because I'm testing it and I can tell you it works. So that's good news. All right. So again, focus back to Hyperledger. Tracy hit on this a little bit, and Hyperledger projects and other blockchain deployments. What are you using and why? And Tracy, I'm going to ask you to start because it's not just that I'm sure Accenture uses a lot of these projects. The reverse of it is, as you mentioned, you also contribute to these projects as well.
Yeah, so I think, this is a challenging one. Let me see if I can remember all 15 of the projects that we have, right?
I'm glad you're going to try, not me. Thanks.
Exactly. I'm not going to try, but we definitely do use the majority, I think, of the different Hyperledger projects that are out there in different ways. We have obviously have projects that use Fabric. We have projects that use Besu. We have projects that use Indy, which of course brings in Aries and Ursa. Of course, we contribute to Bevel and Cactus. I know that in the past we have used potentially early versions of Firefly. So I think that there, if we look at kind of the different Hyperledger projects, there's a number of different deployments that we have. We've really moved into what I would say production type deployments at this point, which is why we created Bevel, which was to allow for those production type deployments of different blockchain networks. As I mentioned, we're technology agnostic, and so we don't focus on just one of these technologies. We just don't focus on Hyperledger. We actually focus across the board on a number of different sorts of blockchain projects. And it really is, choosing the right tool for the right job. So we look at the requirements of the projects that are coming in and determine what the right platform is to use. Sometimes it's not even a blockchain platform, right? That we should be using. And so we do go through that process of understanding what the clients are looking for and finding the best platform that should be used for their particular use case.
Yeah, and I will say, not only does DTC, my company, work with Accenture on a lot of projects, but the other side of it is we also benefited because we use the Bevel work that they did as well. So we're a consumer of that, I should say. So we thank Accenture for that work. And then Christine, why don't you tell us about Sybal and what you're looking to use Hyperledger for?
Yeah, so we're specifically looking at Fabric, and we are looking to record these governance components directly to the blockchain and provide that as a retrievable data source for our clients. So we're excited about what blockchain has to offer in that particular space of recording. Our use case for blockchain is very centralized. It's private, permission based, a little bit different than other public projects, but we're excited about the opportunity to provide that as a mechanism for recording governance components.
Yeah, and I'll say, so I know you use Hyperledger Fabric, but I'll say you also, Sybal's role, if you think about a network, is that I'll call it a level 2 service. So you think of running a blockchain network or any kind of a network, whatever it is, doesn't have to be blockchain, but any network that involves managing policies and governance and so on. And you'd say, oh, I could use Sybal as a governance services provider, if you will, to that network at a level 2. So if you want to give us maybe a quick context for how that usage works, because I know you guys have done a lot with what I call improving the effectiveness of policy management.
Yeah, so just sort of going off of that, the layer 2 governance, typically what you'll find within an organization is their layer 1 governance. So that starts with the policies and the procedures and typically includes a platform, a software, what we call GRC tools, your governance risk compliance tools that are assessing risk based on attestation. Where we are different and where we sit on top is that we are not allowing our software to be a place of attestation. Instead, we're integrating directly into event data, reading that data for its context and correlation to the policies and the procedures, and understanding what that relationship is as a mechanism for measuring the effectiveness of those policies.
Great, thanks. And then if I understand it right, you're also using AI to, in a sense, based on that information, make policy recommendations for improvement, I think.
Yeah, so AI is a small piece. I would think of proof of governance as a holistic system, starting with that policy. So those are very contextual documents, starting with the intent behind the policy, and being that we're very focused in the regulated industry, seeing that regulation is really the premise for the entire life cycle of what is governance, how well is it working, and is it delivering the intent that it is created for?
Great, thanks. All right, so now we're getting down to the tough questions.
Did you want me to answer the last one?
Oh,
too?
I'm sorry. Yeah, I completely forgot. I'm so excited over Firefly. I just keep consuming this stuff. I forget everybody else doesn't know what I know about it at this point. Thanks, Nico.
No worries. I'll make it quick because I know you want to move on. Yeah, so Hyperledger projects, obviously Firefly. Kaleido also uses Hyperledger Fabric and Hyperledger Besu as blockchains that can be run in Kaleido's blockchain as a service platform. We also offer a couple other non-Hyperledger chains as well. Go Ethereum, Quorum, and Kuhrt are also offered through the Kaleido platform as well.
Yeah, and I think if I have it right, when you say Ethereum, that's really bringing on all of the compatible blockchains as well in that space, like Polygon and the other ones, right?
So those that I was mentioning are specific chains that Kaleido runs in our blockchain as a service platform. But yeah, beyond what Kaleido runs, yeah, Firefly also has the ability to connect to, in theory, any EVM compatible chain. That's true as well. Yes.
And then the other thing that's really, and this is what I like about the architecture of Firefly, is the concept that while in a sense out of the box, I get those connectivity options, if you will, the concept that you define interfaces for all the services in effect. And if I found one missing, I could say, gee, I would implement my own adapter or driver for that interface. And then I have the opportunity, as I said earlier, to contribute it back and say, hey, we built this thing. Do you guys have an interest in sharing it, as part of the Firefly network or not? So that's a pretty cool architecture that allows for things to grow, which I really like. Anyway, that gives us a quick overview of how people are using Hyperledger technology in these different companies so far. And then let's flip it around and now talk about demand for blockchain related skills and roles within organizations, yours or somebody else's. So Tracy, maybe Accenture?
Yeah, so at Accenture, I already put in the links for all of the different career pages and whatnot that we have. So we're hiring not only for blockchain, but also for metaverse skills as well. So as I mentioned, I'm part of our Metaverse Continuum Business Group that's focused on, the Internet of Place and the Internet of Ownership. So if we look at, kind of your XR skills, that would kind of cover the Internet of Place. And if you look at the blockchain, digital objects, digital identity, digital money, right? That would be more focused on the blockchain space. And so, as far as skills across the board, right? It doesn't matter if you're a technologist or if you're somebody who has some sales experience, right? Accenture is looking to fill roles within the organization. And so, I think it's really, I think I said this last year, right? It's really up to you as far as the sort of thing that you're interested in when it comes to the type of work that you would want to, suggest for yourself within Accenture. Accenture, as you mentioned, right, very large company, has a number of different sorts of aspects and pieces and parts that kind of fit in together. So we're looking for any sort of skills that you might have. If you're interested in the blockchain space, then there's probably a space for you.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. And like Tracy's right, Accenture is huge. So it's not just their organization, but they're connected to so many other projects around the world, which is big. And then Christine, I think in your case, you have use cases that you've already gone through, I guess, at Sybal. trying to figure out solutions to these different problems. And if I asked you to say, if you look at some of the clients you've been working with, hey, can you talk maybe a little bit about the kinds of skill sets that they might need to implement the kind of solutions that Sybal offers?
On mute. Yeah, so there was a couple of questions in there, but we are and have been, since we launched, speaking to just so many different verticals. And so to Tracy's point, I think it's very specific to the organization, their needs. We're a little bit different in that we're not offering blockchain as a service. We're not a blockchain as a service organization. Sybal, again, is very specific to helping entities understand how well they're governing and measuring that and providing the analytics behind that. But there's so many different organizations. And I think for those that are in the audience that are looking to get into blockchain as a career, I think to your point earlier, Jim, it's not just about building the blockchain itself, being the coder and developer behind it, but there are so many other needs these organizations will have operating it, managing first line, second line defense of it. So it really just depends on what you're passionate about. I think that's really an important component beyond just what organization you're planning to apply for. Are you really passionate about the specific area that you'll go into? Because that passion will lead to you thinking outside of the box and continuing to develop and grow that specific area of the business that's really aligned with the bigger goal of the organization.
Great, thanks. Nico, on your end, I know, as you said, Kaleido, beyond the, in a sense, things that I'm looking at around Firefly, which is great. It's in a sense, a Hyperledger project that offers a lot of value for those of us that want to consume Firefly to speed up delivery of blockchain or consortium solutions for sure. That aside, Kaleido also has had, it sounds like, a fair amount of experience in industry consulting too. So I know you have your team or your company has done work on the Swift project that I'm part of now, but it also has done work within the healthcare space as well. So I think there's probably, I'll call it a fair background that Kaleido would have on skill sets and roles within other organizations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the question, what's the demand for blockchain related skills and roles? 100% of our roles, all of our roles, whether they're engineering or designers or marketers, they're all related to blockchain. So Kaleido is a blockchain company.
Cool.
We have a lot of different roles in engineering specifically. And I think one of the, I won't lead into the next question, but I will say that, primarily we look, when we are looking to hire engineers, we look for great engineers first and foremost. And so having specific industry experience in a blockchain company or having built blockchain projects is not necessarily a prerequisite for all of our roles. Some of them it might be. Some roles we have are very like blockchain engineer protocol specific. Those you probably have to have some experience, but I'll say before I joined Kaleido, I had not written a Web3 app or built anything on a blockchain before. So I've done a lot of learning on the job, which has been great, and I've loved it. But the need is there, but we also recognize that there is not it's a very specialized industry, and so there's not just a large pool of very experienced blockchain engineers that are out there that show up every day looking for a job at Kaleido. So primarily we look for great engineers.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal point, because I guess I'd say it's the opposite of the mainframe CICS COBOL marketplace today, where there's a lot of people with those skill sets. Many of them, of course, are retiring, but at the same time, the demand is going down fairly rapidly in this space because blockchain is one of those core technologies that's in high demand right now. The shortage of blockchain in a skilled blockchain engineers leads to exactly the kind of situation you talked about, where companies will hire you and say, hey, you know what, you bring a lot to the table already. you just don't bring that piece, we figure you can learn that piece. And that gets into the kind of resources we'll talk about later, that both within an organization like Accenture or Kaleido, they have internal training. We do at DTCC. A lot of companies will do that now, but outside of that, there's also great training. So if I want to learn Firefly or some other Hyperledger project, I go out to the Hyperledger site for that project and I go look, and sure enough, there's tutorials and starting points and all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of resources. We'll talk about that. So we actually hit this one already. I think I won't repeat the question, but it's just what roles and opportunities has your company defined? I'll give you a chance to add anything if there's anything we missed so far. Tracy, anything you want to add on this?
So yeah, I guess potentially. I did see a question about CDBC. Yes, we do CDBC. We helped found the Digital Dollar Project. We're working with a number of central banks on their CDBC projects. So that's definitely a space, right? I think it's very difficult for me to list all of the different types of opportunities that exist because there are so many. And so you'll probably like ask me a question, do you guys do this? And I'll be like, yep, we do that. It's very hard to say that we don't do things, a specific thing around the blockchain space. So like I said, if you're thinking about blockchain and Accenture, I'm sure we have some role that works.
Yeah, you're right. The better approach would have been to say, so Tracy, tell me what industries that Accenture doesn't work in, and then that would have been a quicker conversation. So I apologize for starting into that problem.
Probably would have said none there.
There you go. See, that was a quick answer. So that was nice. So right, it does offer a lot of opportunity for sure. So again, roles and opportunity. Christine, anything to add on your end?
No, nothing to add. I would just say for those interested in Sybal, follow our company page and we'll update when roles become available in that area.
Great, thanks. And Nico, anything else on your end?
Yeah, so I guess just to comment on the specific roles that we have, especially the ones we're looking to hire for. In engineering, we have front end, back end, and full stack, as well as protocol engineers. We also have design and marketing positions open as well. Good,
excellent. And then the other side of this for, I'll say, even Sybal, who's newer to the game, but I'll say certainly Accenture on the big end and Kaleido probably in the middle, all of the client companies they work with probably need help too on a lot of the initiatives they're working on. So it's not just with those organizations. From your point of view, Tracy, how do candidates build their skills for blockchain roles?
Yeah, so I think there's some good training certificates that exist out there that the Linux Foundation offers. There's some edX courses that exist that are offered. Looking internally, maybe within your own company, depending on what company you work for, they may actually have some training material and training courses on different sorts of blockchain roles. I know at Accenture, we have a number of different courses focused on Solidity development, focused on Kuhrt development, focused on basically architecture, blockchain architecture, and the trade-offs that exist with the different sorts of platforms that we typically work with. So, I think that there's a misconception potentially, and I did see the one question about a good way for a developer to make the move into blockchain. Like if you're a developer, you've got the skills, right? Developing for other applications that you may be doing now, the blockchain piece is a small piece of an overall technology architecture that exists for a blockchain project. And so you may already have the skills available to get involved with a blockchain project. I do think that there are many different ways to get involved from the actual coding perspective of, it doesn't necessarily have to be smart contracts that you're coding. It could be the front end application that works. It could be a number of different sorts of things. So, I think the skills are very transferable. I think, as an individual contributor myself, somebody who started as a software engineer, if you know one programming language, picking up a second one probably isn't that challenging. And so, if you know something like a Java or that sort of thing, it's possible that you already have the skills to write smart contracts on some of these platforms, or you have the skills to learn a language like Solidity. If you know JavaScript, moving to Solidity is probably pretty easy. So, I would just say that, don't count yourself out of those blockchain roles, because you probably already have a lot of skills that you're going to need.
Yeah, that's a lot of awesome points there. But I'll say one of them, even in my own company, when I started at DCC, they were saying, "Oh, we have these learning paths, Jim, for DLT and blockchain." It's like I looked at it and it's like, okay, so why do we build these? So we get the Reinvent the Wheel award, because as Tracy said, there's a lot of free stuff, or you can get like the edX courses that Tracy was talking about that Hyperledger supports. If you want a certification in that course, you pay for the certification, which is relatively affordable for sure compared to normal education. But if you just want to get the skill sets and you don't worry about the certification, it's free, for those edX courses that Linux Foundation supports. And that's really great. So if I just want to learn how to do something, I can go learn it. And the other point she made is brilliant on the fact that for most of these roles, when I think about especially the implementations of it, and I don't mean project managers and product owners and trainers and marketeers and all that, but I'm talking about and documentation specialists. All of those are needed for, I'll call it, companies to roll out solutions of any kind. But when you look at the blockchain thing, and I go back to that little diagram, she's right that there's only a small subset of people either setting up the infrastructure of the blockchain or writing the smart contracts. And that the bulk of what's going on in many cases is around the rest of it. And that's exactly the value proposition I think that Firefly is trying to hit, to say, wait a second, I think we can make a dent in, quote, all of that other stuff that you're spending money and time on if you use something like Firefly as a starting point. So Nico, anything else you want to add on roles and skills?
Sure, yeah, just would echo everything that Tracy just said. Especially if you're a software engineer, I'm gonna repeat some stuff Tracy said, and I'm gonna say it a little bit differently. But I look at it like every industry has domain specific stuff that you have to learn. Like for instance, I was in communication before I moved into the blockchain world, and sure, I had to learn all the telecom terms and how SMS messaging works and how VoIP calls get established and all that stuff. That was great. But what I spent most of my time doing was just solving big engineering problems, like how do we scale this web service, make it reliable, make it make it multi-tenant, make it secure, and how do we launch this new product? Like those are the types of problems that you're going to encounter in the blockchain world as well. Sure, there's the domain specific stuff of like, well, how do I get a transaction on this particular chain, or how does this one emit events, or how do I write a smart contract for this type of chain? You're going to learn those. And like Tracy said, if you've learned a programming language already, it's not that hard to pick up another one. And the specific tools and technologies and domain specific stuff are like, you can pick up, but really like solving hard software engineering problems is a much more valuable skill than any knowledge of how a particular blockchain does a certain specific thing. So coming in the door with blockchain experience already, that's great. Being a fantastic engineer that loves to tackle really hard engineering problems, even better.
Yeah. So that's actually a great point, because I know in my own world, all right, so I apologize. I'm probably the oldest person I ever know that still codes, which is actually an unfortunate part of my background, I guess, because I started coding before Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, and look at me, I'm still coding. Isn't that sad? So they went on to much greater success than I have. But having said that, what I look at is people I know who are not in the space of actually coding, but back to Nico's point, they are brilliant engineers. So you can have believe it or not, you can have a great engineering mind for analyzing problems, defining solutions, constraints, all kinds of things. If you think that way, in a sense, you usually can add value. A lot of those people don't start out as developers at all. They start out in other roles. They might be a tester. They might be somebody managing requirements, documentation, all kinds of stuff, maybe even a scrum master or even a project owner, something like that. But at the end of the day, they slide into that stuff easily because they have the mindset for it. They have, I'll call it a natural affinity and a passion, as Tracy said earlier, for that kind of stuff too. So there's lots of ways into that funding roles. One other thing that's a little unusual, and that actually, I guess this separates me from the rest of the, what I call crypto world. In the crypto world, you hear about DeFi, decentralized finance, and there's no regulations. It's all Bitcoin. It's all dark money, blah, 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 blah. And so back when Bitcoin was first starting, that was the attraction, is like, oh yeah, the whole world's someday going to evolve to Bitcoin. And while Bitcoin may last forever, honestly, because there's, I think, a value proposition for it that's not going to exactly be taken away by other cryptos to some degree, but certainly, blockchain as a technology is going to evolve and mature. But as it does, sort of the value space of Bitcoin and things like it, cryptos have, will remain in some flavor or fashion. I can't predict it exactly, so it's not going to go away. But what I do see in the blockchain space since I started back in 2017 is that there's a massive shift, that blockchain has blown up as value propositions in all kinds of use cases and industries. And while that's happening, at the same time, guess what? In the real world, we have regulation, compliance, and governance everywhere. And what actually makes the things work is the fact that you can look at these use cases and say, gee, if we were regulating these things, they'd be more widely accepted. So Christine, actually, I'll flip it to you because you had the great line on that, about leaning in on regulation.
Yeah, absolutely, leaning into governance. And I encourage all projects to prioritize writing policy, building out a compliance program in parallel and in same priority as you are building out the mechanisms for your offering, for your project. It's so important that these projects are very focused on solving a big problem, right? A lot of it has to do, as you highlighted, in the financial sector and bridging a lot of the gaps with financial services and access to those financial services and the transparency of those financial services and offerings. And so there's a requirement that there must be preparation, proactive measures taken to have strong governance. I will say, and just sort of level set and say, code is not governance. There will be many mechanisms and built into the protocol, whether it's proof of stake or proof of work, and how governance is essentially carried out through voting mechanisms. But that is not governance. Governance, again, goes back to how are you protecting the consumer? What policies are in place that set the rails around what should or should not happen, and then the active measurement, action, and proof of effectiveness that you can share with your community to elevate trust across the operations and across the project. And so when we look at what are the challenges, perhaps, and opportunities that are created when you are thinking about governance, I'll first start with the challenges of just like we're here right at this career fair saying, how do we get into blockchain? It's very similar where you have to find talent that focuses solely on the compliance piece. So I think that could be a challenge in navigating how do we bring in the right talent that's committed to the project, but is solely focused on making sure this project serves the community and serves it well. The opportunity, though, is you getting compliance experts into this industry. The regulation is coming. It needs to come, but I think there's a requirement to create that piece of the project in parallel with building out the mechanism. So lots of opportunity. I think that will bring to this industry. And rightfully so, as we are working directly with consumers it's important that we think about that.
Great, thanks. Tracy, thoughts around governance, compliance, and regulations and the impact or challenges that creates or opportunities in blockchain?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Christine is saying, right? I think that there's two sides of any sort of blockchain project, and you know, technology is probably the easiest part of the overall problem, right? The governance and having a number of different organizations come together and work together and set up those policies up front so that they know what they're dealing with, right? And just the interaction that needs to happen, the sort of collaboration that needs to occur between those different organizations is quite a challenge, right? And you know, we have people at Accenture who've actually gone to the Hill, right, and have conversations to educate the people who are making these regulations and to help them understand the different technology problems that occur and the challenges that exist. And so I think there is a big opportunity here, right, for us to do that education, for us to work with the different clients as they come together on what it is it's governance. I know, Jim, I think it was a couple years back, DTCC and Accenture actually released a paper on governing your DLT networks, and I think
yes, they did. It was
I'll go find that paper. I'll put it in the links here in the
Great.
chat. But I think there's a lot of good information in that. But it's a big space that we do need to think about as we think about these blockchain type projects and solutions.
Yeah. So Nico, your thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. So one of the things that occurred to me as I read this question that we haven't talked a lot about tonight are private blockchains. And private permission chains offer both a unique solution and I guess opportunity and challenge all at the same time. But you know, most of us, and I'm speaking for myself here, before I really got into the world of blockchain per se, just like didn't even know about private blockchains. I always thought blockchains were only public and like everybody could see it and anybody can do transactions on them. And it turns out actually for enterprise, a private permission chain can be a really compelling thing, and for several reasons. One, it lets the enterprise or a consortium of companies define the rules around governance, and so they get to make the rules of who's allowed to do transactions on this chain. What are the rules for consensus, and it also allows those enterprises to make decisions about governance of the chain in compliance with regulation in their industry as well. So and one of the other things that we're seeing now is a convergence of public and private or sort of hybrid chains as well, or different you know, layer 2 chains that may even bridge a gap between a private chain and a public chain. It's all kind. There's a whole spectrum of like public and private chains as well. So I would say that's probably, in terms of challenges, that's probably the new big one around this is like, okay, when we start looking at doing stuff cross-chain, how does that change the game? And there's all kinds of new opportunities and challenges there when we start looking about you know, cross-chain and moving from private chain to public chain, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And so one other thing I'll throw in the mix, because I've worked on a lot of different blockchain solutions, and I'll say the one that as Tracy talked about earlier with the digital dollar project in Accenture around trying to figure out and understand central bank digital currencies and how they can be used in different scenarios, if you will, different use cases within countries. They are the leader in that space. And having worked with them on that project, and also you recognize that there's lots of different, what I call legal jurisdictions that these solutions have to operate in. So cross-border isn't something that's unique, like travel, like me traveling to Europe doesn't happen a lot, but cross-border in a sense, or cross-jurisdiction happens all the time. And the one thing I'll say, you know, just if you wonder where your tax dollars go, is that the world, I thank all the governments in the world for wanting to make the world more complex, because they certainly don't, thing is that they keep adding more laws every year in every jurisdiction. So I'm on the European Blockchain Observatory and Forum. We do research for the European Council on how they put up new laws in the US. I'm connected to a lot of the states and stuff and the work they've been doing to implement new laws around blockchain and technology and privacy, all kinds of areas. And so what you recognize is the legal complexity of the world is exploding. I mean, it's not quite as fast as COVID was, but it's not far behind in terms of complexity. And then you say, well, how do I effectively manage that? You cannot handle it any other way, but in a sense through automated digital trust and automation. And if you don't automate, nothing in a sense would get done. They talk about supply chain and how COVID showed how weak supply chain links were. Well, if you think about, in a sense, certain technologies, blockchain being a key one, and AI and some of the other ones as well, if you think about trying to deal with the complexity in terms of the world, in terms of legal frameworks and policies and regulations and so on, it would be impossible to even consider being successful going forward without, in a sense, a lot of these technologies. And so, again, the good news with, I guess, other career paths might be lawyers, because outside of blockchain, we certainly have more regulations going on everywhere and more compliance to manage. So there's an endless, unfortunately, I guess, an endless and growing demand for compliance and regulation, for sure. And so that does lead back to blockchain, automation, AI, and a whole bunch of other technologies that can help address that. So thank you, everyone, for that. Let me go to the last question and just kick it off and say, so we're talking about this next career fair session on October 26th, which is, I think, a Wednesday as well. Is it a Wednesday, John, or I think it is, right?
It's on a Wednesday, Jim, just like this one, except we're going to have a lot of virtual tables from the recruiting company. So it's going to be much more interactive in the latter half of the event.
Great. So Tracy, best piece of advice you want to give to the attendees on a career?
I would say bring your questions. Right. The last time that I participated in this and we had the kind of virtual tables, it was really valuable to hear the questions that people had, to talk through the specifics of what it is that they're interested in, and in my case, right, what Accenture could do for that. Right. And just be curious, I think is the best piece of advice that I can give you.
Great. Christine, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would echo what Tracy said. And then also in that curiosity, you really want to understand the why behind the organization. What are they focused on? What do they care about? And if you are aligned with that, that's a company you want to dive a little bit deeper with. If you are disaligned with that, you will, if you're hired there, or if you get a position there, it's going to be a job to you. And I think it's so important with the climate changing, with hybrid workforce model, that you're working in an area that you care deeply about, and is part of a much bigger goal, bigger picture than yourself. Yeah, great point, because you're right. Everything, all of these, in a sense, organizations operate inside of communities and a sort of a context, and they're adding value or delivering value, hopefully, for those communities and those contexts, whatever they are. And so, you're right, if you align with those or value those problem areas and want to see them solved, then you're going to be passionate, as Tracy had said earlier. And that's a lot to bring to the table that you're going to add as a candidate, for those kind of companies, for sure. Nico, any thoughts?
Yeah, both really great thoughts from both Tracy and Christine there. I would just echo that. And just to repeat something that was said earlier too, don't sell yourself short. If you may not think that you are qualified, but you may actually be. And so as Tracy said, be curious, ask questions, and have that conversation. We would love to chat with you about what the day-to-day in a software engineering role at a startup working in as a blockchain infrastructure provider is actually like, that sort of thing. I guess one other suggestion that I'll throw out there too, Hyperledger has a great Discord server that has a bunch of us in it. And if you think of, maybe you can't make the next session, but you still want to stay in touch. Yes, I'm on LinkedIn. No, I don't check it frequently. Sorry, but I'm on Discord every day. So if you want to chat after this, Discord is the best place to do that. Thanks, Madison. There's a link that was just dropped in chat there if you want to join. So yeah, thanks.
Excellent. Actually, a great point, Nico, because I will say for everybody who's listening, if you're interested, it never hurts to go through this kind of a process, not just the career fair, but talking to these companies, engaging them. As you can see, they're all interested in what I call outreach and looking out to find out who's out there, what are you interested in, and how can we find what I call matches and alignment. Even if I don't want, if I go through that process that Tracy was talking about, bring my questions, talk to people at Accenture, if nothing happens out of that, I'm still better for having gone through the process. I've learned a lot, let's put it that way. Every time I've gone to this kind of a process, whether it's interviews or whatever I was doing, I did come back learning a lot. Didn't always have a job offer at the other end of the day, and I wasn't always looking for that, but I always did learn a lot from the process. So I would encourage you all to think about that second session that's coming up, because that's your real opportunity to go one-on-one and start asking, questions of these companies and get some real feedback and some thoughts, which would really be great. So, all right, that said, that's the end of the questions we had tonight. I do want to open up briefly just for any Q&A, anything that anybody has that I didn't or we didn't cover that you want to ask a question about from a career perspective. So yeah, if you want to unmute yourself, and let me take a look at the audience. If you want to unmute and ask a question, that's fine too. If not, at the end, I do have this presentation. John and I are both going to put our presentations up on the YouTube site where the recording will be posted. I will say, appreciate the chat. We'll pull the references out of the chat for resources. We got a lot of good ones in there. I know John will pull those. But I do have in this presentation a bunch of links out here, the Linux Foundation site. There's tons of projects out there, Hyperledger site, the Hyperledger wiki site where all the work groups are, the greenhouse video that sort of shows you what Hyperledger is about with all the projects, where you can find Hyperledger on YouTube, the global forum sessions we just did in Dublin. Hyperledger is nice enough to push those all out there. You can learn a lot from those. We have meetup groups all around the world. David Boswell knows, I'm sure, the count, but I'll say it's in the neighborhood of 175 plus groups that are out there around the world. So there probably is a meetup group in your area geographically that you can join if you're interested. But we do a lot of virtual meetup stuff now after COVID. And so you're really welcome to join meetup groups anywhere you want in the world. There's plenty of Hyperledger tutorials. And as Tracy said, there's not just tutorials for each of the different projects, but there's actually courses that Hyperledger has worked with partners to put out on the edX site that you can at least take the courses free. If you want to get certified, you pay for the certification piece at what I call an affordable price, but at least the courses are free. So I've actually taken, some of those I've paid for the certification, some I've taken free just because I want to learn the stuff. And then there's plenty of Hyperledger events all the time. So all of those are resources on this one slide. If you're looking at other things, I will say 101 Blockchains has some good stuff that's free, a lot of good free content out there. If you want to, you should open up an account for free. You don't have to, they have courses as well, but you don't have to pay for their certified courses. There's plenty of good free content out there as well. If you're just looking for basic academic stuff, Khan Academy is fine. If you're looking for actually coding skills and you don't have money to pay for it, Free Code Camp, I've participated in them for a long time, actually contributed over there. There's plenty of other code camps out there, but this particular one doesn't charge any tuition, so it's free. IBM has some basic information out on their site on what is blockchain. And then just this last one, this query, when you click it, I know we don't have 12,000 people on the call tonight. The good news is when I put in the word blockchain and I said, show me jobs, I got 12,000 hits tonight on Indeed.com. So I can say there's more jobs out there in blockchain than there are candidates here tonight, for sure. The last thing I'll say is I got some other things out here. These are links. One of them is IBM's former CEO, Jenny Rometty, who pointed out that the importance of a college degree isn't as high now for these six-figure jobs in what they call new collar technology space. So if you listen to what Nico was talking about, they're not saying you need a 4-year degree from Cornell, to qualify. What you need to do is be, a competent engineer or having some skill sets in that area that would make them interested in wanting to engage with you further. But, they weren't saying you needed a 4-year degree for a lot of this stuff. And so the good news, that's good news for almost everybody, because if you don't need a college degree to do well in this space, if you have it, great. If you're going to invest in it, great, but it's not required anymore for a lot of the roles, which is nice. The other thing we talked about was the governance issue. There was just an article this week that a crypto hacker stole 600 million from, I think it was Coinbase. I believe it was Coinbase, I'm not sure, one of the exchanges in crypto. So there's always a security problem. Even if you're not going to work in blockchain, be a security engineer. To me, one of the guaranteed things on the planet that will always grow is the need for security is never going to get less every year. It'll only increase. So there's always going to be roles in that space. The other thing we talked about, Christine mentioned it, leaning into regulation. Just this week, the Financial Stability Board, which is the financial arm for the G20 nations that sort of control, I'll call it the world's finance pretty much. They have said that they're proposing directions on what they call governance rules for cryptocurrencies and digital assets, all kinds of financial assets. And so regulations going up, not down, and the complexity of managing and administering those regulations is going up, not down. And then the last thing was US Treasury had blacklisted one of the crypto exchanges, claiming that they were violating AML rules on money laundering. And so that was an extreme, call it enforcement action by the US Treasury. All it points out is that, in a sense, the ability to operate free of regulation is not something that you can expect to see much of in the future going forward. So those are just some, I'll call it, thoughts out there as well. And there's a lot more resources. But I think that I call it, this thing is a good gateway. Certainly go to the Accenture site, go to Kaleido site, go to those sites, go to Sybal if you want. But this is a pretty good gateway to a lot of other links as well, for what it's worth. So with that, I want to thank everybody for tonight. Any last questions anyone has before we wrap up? If not, I want to thank our panelists tonight, Tracy, Christine, Nico. You guys were awesome. I really appreciate everything you gave us tonight. It was wonderful. John, any closing thoughts on your end?
I would just say, Jim, we had a great session here, and definitely everyone who attended this session should definitely attend the 26th session. That's when we're really going to have much more of an interactive session where you can take all the takeaways from this event and apply them toward really getting in front of these great companies and interacting with them on a one-to-one basis. So we'll have virtual tables on the 26th. It'll be at this exact same time as this session. So I look forward to seeing everyone on the 26th. That's all I have, Jim.
All right. Well, thank you, John. And thank you again, panelists. And thanks for the audience tonight. I appreciate everybody being here. And I'll look forward to seeing everybody on the 26th of October. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
So, John, do you have everything out of the chat?
No, I do not. Jim, I was originally being able to copy it, and then it seemed like it stopped copying for me. So if you want to grab the whole chat and just send it to me via email, that'd be helpful.
Yeah, I will. All right. Well, thank you again, everyone. I'll grab the chat and then send it along.
John, quick housekeeping thing on